About exactly 1 week ago, I did a video regarding Orlando Anderson and Tupac Shakur. Well, more specifically, Mayweather being involved in the story. And if you guys want the full details of that, I suggest you take a look at that particular video on the video section alone. But for now, one of the fighters that I had in mind was Chris Weidman when I was thinking about Orlando Anderson. And why is that? Well, for one, I can tell you that with Orlando Anderson, he was the quintessential up-and-coming fighter that nobody knew that was dangerous. And once again, we all know what Orlando Anderson did. This is not in any way to promote gang culture or senseless violence by any stretch of the imagination, but rather to show you a metaphor of combat in terms of how it's interpreted in how I view the combat sports world. But nonetheless, Chris Weidman had a tough upbringing in his mixed martial arts career. Just like most fighters, he wasn't financially stable, and every time he would go to a party, some sort of bank party with his wife and their coworkers, he would often get asked, well, what is it that you do for a living and how much do you make? And would basically feel such of the lesser man in a room full of guys that he knew he would absolutely dismantle with a heartbeat, because any trained fighter or any trained individual can just absolutely do that to a room full of corporate clowns and bankers, right? That's not a hard task, especially if you train all day, and especially if you're training to be the best. So Chris Weidman was made to feel less of himself because of his financial situation. And again, this is an aspect that a lot of fighters ultimately deal with in terms of how they go about their early stages of their career. And in the midst of all that, they persevere and suffer through the hardships, and then somehow come out of it as a winner and then as a champion. And then out of all people, Chris Weidman, as one of the individuals who has beaten one of the greatest mixed martial arts fighters of all time, which is Anderson Silva. However, the lackluster aspect of that is that Chris Weidman did not get the clout that he should have deserved, being that he beat the greatest of all time. Sure, did he get a media tour, of which was in grand proportion within the United States of ESPN and all the other American networks? Yes, but it wasn't like Chris Weidman was worldwide famous in a way where, let's say, if he was to go to Germany, he would be mobbed by people and people would not somehow let him shop or anything like that. And I'm talking Prince Harry, Meghan Markle status, to where you can't go anywhere without a bodyguard. He wasn't that famous. For guys that beat Anderson Silva, you should be that famous. The problem is the world doesn't see fighting that way. And just like with Orlando Anderson, the rap game and its casual observers really don't see the world in a way of the shooter is the hero, or in this case of mixed martial arts, as the giant killer or the legend killer as the hero of them all. That's not what was seen here. What had happened was he went on to have a great career, but then in the midst of all that, he also had a bit of a lackluster media coverage in the way that Chris Weidman should have had. In other words, like I said, Chris Weidman should have really been given a red carpet treatment in terms of his championship run after he beat Anderson Silva, who was the greatest of all time. We're talking about Vitor Belfort when Vitor Belfort was on juice, and then we're talking about Lyoto Machida when he was in his prime, and not only in his prime, within his optimal weight of 185, of which Lyoto Machida just absolutely looked like one of the best in the world, and Chris Weidman beat him at that stage. Now the tables have turned, just like with everything else. You have a friend in your professional life or in your personal life that, let's say, is doing better than you, okay? And all of a sudden, somewhere in a few years, you become a CEO of a company, or you become the head of state, or you hold a position to which is way lower than his, when originally he had a higher position than you. Let's say some sort of manager, or let's say some sort of higher position in the military when it comes to rankings. Well, that's kind of what's going on this weekend with Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley. Because let's think about this. Aljo was the student of Chris Weidman. And then in the midst of all that, now Aljo seems to be one of the best fighters in the world. And is he still the teacher for Chris Weidman? That's for them to decide within the culture of their gym to find out. But other than that, what is clear and what is apparent is the rise of Aljamain Sterling and the fall of Chris Weidman. And why this is important to understand is that when Chris Weidman was coming up, he looked like an absolute world beater. You want to know the best description I can give you about Chris Weidman during his time? Think of Khamzat Chimaev. You got to remember, this guy became the 185 champion, undefeated, 10-0 when he beat Anderson Silva. So that tells you a lot about a person who seems indestructible in the eyes of many people that were witnessing it at that time. Now, fast forward to this fight that he has with Brad Tavares, you may not really see him as that same Khamzat figure that you did when you saw him coming up during his days of when he fought, let's say, Mark Munoz. None of that. What you see now is the common transition that you're always going to see in combat sports. And what that is that you got to understand that time is limited. Time is precious. But if time permits you to be the best in the world at whatever it is that you do, cherish that moment, because you know what? It's not going to last forever. And whenever anything doesn't last forever, one thing you have to remember is gratitude and appreciation. So what can I say about this particular video that's about Chris Weidman, his history, his rise and his downfall, and the switching between him and his teammates of one guy being the top guy and one guy being the prelim guy or the card opener of the pay-per-view? The one thing I can say is that things change and things evolve and the world turns, so appreciate it when it's your turn, but also appreciate it when it's not.